Chapter 61 Plan to rule the entire plateau. In the castle courtroom, Maximus sat on the throne, waiting for his ministers to speak and report on what had happened in the past 2 months while he was away. Your Majesty, first, our monthly profits have reached a staggering amount of 5 million gold coins, Tristan said excitedly. However, Maximus, upon hearing this, simply raised his eyebrows. The 10 million gold he had when he came to the arcane continent became 400 billion gold in just 2 months after his return. So, 5 million was merely peanuts to him and he didn't care much about it. Did the other kingdoms react or do something about the Etheria Pavilion? That was what he wanted to know. Tristan's face turned ugly. Dolan, noticing that Tristan was unable to speak, so said, Your Majesty, some kings had violent reactions to the Etheria Pavilion. Some of them even forcefully took control and stole the pavilion's products. Maximus, with a dark expression, continued to listen. Fortunately, before your Majesty left, you left us with a mechanical weapon capable of killing a Tier 4 Sky Knight. Dolan sighed in relief as he spoke. Then after one of the kings took control of the pavilion, Phantom Group publicly assassinate that king. After that, most of them became docile and easier to talk to. Dolan finished his narration. Good, Maximus smiled, praising his foresight. Before leaving, he was worried that something like this might happen, so he left a Type C mechanical weapon capable of killing a Tier 4 Sky Knight. What happened to that kingdom? Maximus became curious about what his ministers would do without him. We received compensation from that kingdom's royal family. As for others, we left it as it is, not making any hasty decisions without your approval, Dolan said. Although their decision was somewhat pragmatic, Maximus understood. For them, land and physical wealth were important, but for him, the common people were more important than all of Sunburnt Plateau. There are countless lands the size of the Sunburnt Plateau could be found on the scattered land of the cursed continent. However, finding people was hard, as most of the land was infested by beast creatures. Moreover, all of his plans required the common people as a foundation. Otherwise, why not just abandon Sunburnt Plateau? You know the kingdom's monthly profits are not even a fraction of what could he earn in a day in Arcane Continent. Your Majesty, where did you acquire that mechanical weapon the Phantom Group used? Landon asked. Being the youngest among them and lacking knowledge, Landon felt comfortable asking sensitive questions without realizing anything wrong with his question. He only believed that knowing the source of their Majesty's mechanical weapon would enable them to obtain or purchase more, as the weapon was truly remarkable. Landon thought that a few more of them could conquer the entire Sunburnt Plateau without much effort. Upon hearing the question, Maximus nearly laughed. Fortunately, he already had an excuse prepared. While he could have chosen to maintain an air of mystery about it, he knew that it would raise doubts sooner or later. It's from my teacher, he began. A few years ago, when we were attacked by cultists, my teacher happened to pass by and saved me. Otherwise, how could the guards save me when my father, a Tier 3 Earth Knight, couldn't do anything about it? You may have also noticed my rapid progress in strength, going from an apprentice mage to a nascent mage in just a few years. Maximus carefully explained his excuses, wanting to avoid endless questions. Oh, is your Majesty's teacher still here? By the way, how powerful is your Majesty's teacher? Landon asked eagerly. Although Maximus was slightly annoyed by Landon's incessant questioning, he brushed it off as it is a rare opportunity to solidify the peculiar actions and progress he did after transmigrating. No, my teacher is already in the Arcane Continent, Maximus replied. My teacher is a Tier 5 Mystic Mage and also a Tier 5 Alchemist, he said calmly. This statement excited his ministers, even though they didn't fully grasp the concept of a Tier 5 Mage or what an Alchemist is. They had common sense, and the fact that their Majesty, who was just a Tier 3 nascent mage, could defeat a Tier 4 Sky Knight, led them to imagine the power of a Tier 5 mage. Merely the thought of it overwhelmed them, knowing that they had solid support behind them. The reason they hadn't hastily conquered the entire Sunburnt Plateau was due to rumors that some of the other factions had backers from elsewhere. They didn't know who had such support, so they dared not act rashly. What about the progress of the army? Maximus inquired. After he conquered the Fairy Kingdom and the army continued to expand, incorporating defeated soldiers into its ranks. Thus Maximus was unaware of its current status. As per your instructions, Your Majesty, we have selected the most elite soldiers, General Smith began. After a thorough screening of past soldiers and newly recruited ones, we now have a total of 30,000 soldiers, General Smith stated proudly, standing tall with his back straight. Good, Maximus expressed his satisfaction. During this time, elite soldiers were indispensable. Although Maximus could single-handedly dominate the entire Sunburnt Plateau due to his immense wealth of billions of gold coins, he knew that he couldn't sustain it once he left for the Arcane Continent without a capable group of army. "What about the construction of the Moonlight Kingdom?" Maximus inquired. "We are making significant progress. Although we don't have magic materials yet, the common materials required to build the kingdom, according to your Majesty's blueprint, are abundant," Dorian explained. "For the common materials that are not within our kingdom's territory, we have purchased them at cheap prices from the surrounding kingdoms. This is also one of the reasons the neighboring kingdoms didn't resist much regarding the Etheria Pavilion, as we bought a vast amount of materials from them." Maximus nodded in acknowledgement. When he flew back to the Sunburnt Plateau, he noticed that the Moonlight Kingdom was already taking shape, requiring only the final touches to activate the natural formation array. He thinks that after a few more months the kingdom's architecture and facilities will be completed. Having a bunch of strong and full people truly do magic in doing construction. Of course, the fast progress also had to do with the system mall items. Like the alchemy item that can automatically break rocks into a suitable size building block. Or the alchemy item that quickly dries cement-like substance that sticks building block together. Moreover, to have a budget to do all of this, we can't forget about the contribution of the surrounding kingdom. Without money he can't buy any of these alchemy items. Good. Furthermore, I plan to expand the blueprint to accommodate the entire population of Sunburnt Plateau, Maximus declared. His ministers were somewhat puzzled by what their Majesty meant. The entire population? How big of an area is that? Why would it need to be that big? While some had already deduced the meaning behind the statement, they remained curious. Maximus, observing the varied expressions of his ministers, continued, "That's right, I am planning to conquer the entire land." This statement caused an explosion of excitement in the court. Thoughts raced through their minds, wondering if their Majesty truly intended to bring the entire Sunburnt Plateau under his rule. "Are there any questions?" Maximus inquired. The crowd of ministers paused for a moment, contemplating. "How do we plan to achieve that, Your Majesty? Did Your Majesty's teacher leave more mechanical weapons for us to use?" Landon asked eagerly, hoping to try a mechanical weapon for himself. "Of course not. How could I use weapons to violently eliminate my opposition?" Maximus denied. Although he could single-handedly kill all the rulers in Sunburnt Plateau without any trouble, he was concerned about their potential backers. He also believed the rumors that most of the forces had backers supporting them. He believed that many kings and rulers in Sunburnt Plateau originated from other regions in the Cursed Continent or even the Arcane Continent. As for the naturally promoted individuals in Sunburnt Plateau, most of them eventually left for other places. Unless they retired here, no sane individuals would stay on this barren plateau to rule the land. As for why would most kings and rulers who possess the strength of Tier 4 Sky Knights stay in this desolate region? Most of them were here for unique resources or to scout for potential talent to recruit into their forces. Thus he couldn't simply kill them. Killing one or two might go unnoticed, but if he were to eliminate them all, he could become a target. For now, he wanted to remain calm, proceed cautiously, and accumulate wealth. "How, then, does Your Majesty plan to rule the entire plateau?" Landon asked, puzzled. Without the mechanical weapons, he couldn't fathom any other means His Majesty could control the entire plateau. "Do you just talk to them peacefully?" Without His Majesty's teacher deterrent it would just be a joke, Landon thought. "Of course, I will persuade them peacefully," Maximus smiled. "I possess a cloned personal token from my teacher, imbued with his mana and spiritual signature. I'm sure the rulers of the surrounding kingdoms will understand my difficulty that they will have to move to another place," Maximus said jokingly. Landon, on the other hand, was shocked. Did he just predict His Majesty's thinking? Did I unlock my hidden talent? Landon thought excitedly. Chapter 62 Helmsworth Family. In the flying boat, Maximus was heading to one of the kingdoms in the Sunburnt Plateau. He was going to persuade them to relocate and leave the island. He couldn't just start a war like before, as he might offend someone unintentionally. Every ruler of a kingdom may have a background, as most of them possess a Tier 4 Sky Knight strength or even more. Even in the past, in the Fairy Kingdom, he didn't consider conquering the kingdom until months later when the king died and there was no other response. It was confirmed that the Fairy Kingdom had no background whatsoever, although it remained a mystery why the kingdom had two Tier 4 Sky Knight individuals in its midst. After traveling in his flying boat for a while, he caught sight of the capital city of one of the kingdoms in sunburnt Plateau. Although he didn't know the name of the kingdom, he released his powerful spiritual consciousness to notify the ruler of his presence. While he adopted an amiable approach in conquering the sunburnt plateau, it didn't mean he was a coward. With his current wealth, he could afford some Tier 6 mechanical weapons. Furthermore, based on his previous travel to Elnor Island, the harbor before reaching the Arachne continent, a Tier 5 Mystic Mage or Tier 5 Lunar Knight was already considered the strongest in the Cursed Continent. Therefore, he was fully confident in occupying the entire sunburnt plateau for himself. Of course, he needed to maintain a low profile, as one never knows when they have a trump card when they are cornered. Upon sensing the powerful aura of a Tier 3 nascent mage, the ruler of the kingdom flew toward his floating boat, seemingly to greet him. "How can I assist you, esteemed mage?" the ruler respectfully inquired. "I'm Maximus Shadowcrest, the ruler of Moonlight Kingdom." "May I know your name?" Maximus asked curiously, stepping out of the flying boat to meet him face to face. "I'm Ferris Helmsworth, a peripheral member of the Helmsworth family," Ferris responded, hoping to intimidate Maximus with his surname. The Helmsworth family is one of the most powerful families in the Cursed Continent, with their main territory remodeled to be a Tier 5 mana environment. Transforming a barren land in Cursed Continent into a Tier 5 mana environment is a dream for many forces and families living here. So being able to accomplish it sets them apart. "Oh, Helmsworth? Do you happen to know Griffin Helmsworth?" Maximus inquired. He recalled the person who incessantly bothered him during his trip to the Arcane Continent. "Are you referring to young Master Griffin?" Ferris was shocked to hear about the prodigal son of the main branch family from an outsider. "Yes, the one who arrived at the Arcane Continent a month ago," Maximus confirmed. "Yes, young Master Griffin is the most gifted combat prodigy to be born in a century in the Helmsworth family," Ferris boasted about his knowledge of his young Master Griffin. After all, he couldn't disgrace his family, especially to an outsider. While it was true that young Master Griffin was a renowned combat prodigy, despite his low potential of only rank 3 rare, young Master Griffin was more famous for being a prodigal son. Although he didn't engage in prostitution, young Master Griffin was addicted to gambling. It's okay if it's just normal gambling, but this young master, despite never winning a match in his life, continues to gamble. If it weren't for his family's wealth, he might have been sold as a slave by now to pay off his debts. Observing that Maximus seemed to know young Master Griffin, Ferris asked, "Do you know young Master?" "Of course, we became friends just months ago," Maximus sincerely replied. Although Griffin could be talkative and occasionally annoying, he was indeed worth befriending as he lacked ulterior motives and conspiracies. "That's a relief," Ferris sighed. Since Maximus was a friend of young Master Griffin, everything was fine. Griffin, despite his mixed reputation, excelled at making friends, and all of his friends, without exception, possessed great potential or have something exceptional about them. It seemed as though all of his luck in gambling manifested in his relationships with people. "If you're a friend of young Master Griffin, then feel free to let me know if you need anything," Ferris said, recalling that Maximus had released his spiritual consciousness earlier as if he needed something. "Well?" Maximus hesitated, feeling somewhat embarrassed about what to say. After all, it involved his friend's territory, even if it was just a portion of it. He didn't want to appear outwardly greedy. After pondering for a moment, he gathered his words. "I have come on behalf of my teacher, a Tier 5 Mystic Mage. My teacher desires to claim the entire sunburnt plateau as his territory," Maximus said with seriousness, attributing it all to his disguised teacher. Since he had already used this alternate identity as his backer, why not continue using it? Moreover, having a Tier 5 Mystic Mage as a ruler will not be as conspicuous as him a Tier 3 Nascent Mage becoming one. "I see. If it's from an esteemed Tier 5 Mystic Mage, then it is indeed fitting for him to rule over a plateau on his own," Ferris replied as if understanding. Most people born in the Cursed Continent who became powerful aspired to return to their roots and rule a land of their own in their homeland. So it was not surprising that Maximus's teacher had similar plans. As for not him inquiring whether his teacher was born in the Cursed Continent, Ferris hadn't thought that far. Only those born in the Cursed Continent were allowed to have their own land and rule over it. Otherwise, the families here would lose their place in the Cursed Continent. By then, it would already be flooded by families and forces from the Arcane Continent if it were the case. You see, even though the Arcane Continent was the most prosperous place, it had strict rules and regulations that kept them in check. Therefore, most of the families and factions in the arcane continent hoped to have a land of their own away from it. After all, who wants to be always on the leash of others? Of course, they can't do anything about it. Unless they're very powerful to travel on their own toward another place, they can forget about it and be an obedient dog to the rules and regulations of the arcane continent. It seemed like arcane and cursed continent is quite close, as it only needed half a month of journey. However, that was using a specially processed body of a dead Tier 9 sea creature. As for lower than that, like a Tier 8 vessel, it would take at least 10 years just to go from arcane continent to cursed continent. Just imagine using lower-tier vessels. Maybe your lifespan already run out and you are still on the way. Just give me a week to settle and I will give you this kingdom, Ferris said knowingly. After all, what could he do? Rebel? Leaving his territory is the most appropriate solution, considering he was stationed here only for a family task, not truly to rule the land. Maximus was also surprised by Ferris's decisiveness. He had assumed that he would need to offer some form of compensation or negotiation. But none of that happened. After talking for a while, Ferris invited Maximus to visit his castle, as it wasn't appropriate to have a prolonged conversation in the air. Once they were both seated, Maximus asked Ferris a question. By the way, why are you in such a remote place? This was something he couldn't comprehend. The Helmsworth family already had a Tier 5 mana environment, from what he had heard. So why were they still clinging to this barren place? I was sent here for a family task, Ferris explained. A family task? Maximus inquired. The Helmsworth family's currency is contribution points, and to earn them, we are assigned family tasks, Ferris elaborated. My task is to manage the low-grade crystal mine in this territory, and more importantly, to scout for individuals with rare potential and above. The duration of the task is 100 years, and after me, another person will replace me while I move on to another task, Ferris carefully explained. I see, Maximus nodded, finally understanding. The sunburnt plateau, despite its barren nature, contained numerous low-grade magic crystal mines. Though not rare, they still held value as a source of income. It was similar to the previous conflict between the Fairy Kingdom and the Jade Kingdom, where they fought over a small, low-grade crystal mine. After ruling over the previous kingdom, Maximus had gained control of the mine, but its output was disappointingly low. It only produces less than 100 low-grade magic crystals per month. The reason for the low output was that mining prohibited the use of mana or energy. Magic crystals were highly fragile upon extraction and would assimilate with the environment at the slightest fluctuation of mana. Maximus had also attempted to use mechanical devices that didn't rely on mana, but the results were disappointing. It seemed that any energy fluctuation would cause the magic crystal to assimilate with the environment. As for the recruitment of talented individuals, the previous Fairy Kingdom had neglected that aspect. Maximus wondered if the previous ruler of the Fairy Kingdom had other goals, as they hadn't actively recruited individuals with high talents like other forces stationed in the area. Did the ruler of the previous Fairy Kingdom come to this place merely to experience life or for some other reason? Chapter 63 Various Faction. In the castle, Maximus and Ferris were sitting at the table, discussing the various factions in the Sunburnt Plateau. Do you know all the factions and families stationed in the Sunburnt Plateau? Maximus asked. I don't know all of the families and factions stationed there, but I know some, Ferris replied. There are 2 other families stationed here that have the same strength as us. The first one is the Molehound family. Although it's a family of knights, it's one of the strongest families in the Cursed Continent, with a Tier 6 lunar knight as its head. The second is the Wessel family. They are a family of scholars, but be careful around them, they are quite proud and have a lot of connections. When he heard the term family of scholars, he wondered what profession that was. After browsing his memory, he finally knew. The scholar or teacher profession is somewhat famous, though not as famous as alchemists and mechanics. Scholars mainly study the history and general knowledge of the Ethereum realm, while alchemists and mechanics study the profession to master and control the law. Scholars mainly dump vast amounts of knowledge to make their souls purer to advance. They are also renowned as enlightenment teachers of powerful families' children, providing enlightening guidance to top their full potential. This potential here is not just the one shown in his system panel, which mainly shows your aptitude for absorbing and refining mana. It is a broader term encompassing potential in various fields such as alchemy, mechanics, battle magic, formation, etc. Scholars are one of the professions capable of detecting this hidden potential. Moreover, with a deep and broad knowledge, they are like a kickstarter to a fire. guiding individuals to start on their path of choice. Being a teacher, it's no doubt that they have a lot of connections. As for us, the Helmsworth family, we are a family of battle mages, as you know. Ferris explained, summarizing the 3 strongest families stationed in the Sunburnt Plateau. Are there any more families and factions stationed here? Maximus asked. Yes, there are quite a few, but they don't have tier 5 or higher support, so you can rest assured, Ferris reassured him. Afterward, Ferris provided more specific information about each faction. Some were only stationed there to recruit talent and did not possess any magic crystal mines, making it easier to persuade them to leave. However, for others with multiple magic crystal mines, persuasion would be more difficult. Nevertheless, Ferris suggested that Maximus offer them a compensation of 100,000 low-grade magic crystals per magic mine if he wanted to avoid too much trouble. Maximus understood this approach. Although he could kill or forcibly banish them from the Sunburnt Plateau, the subsequent consequences would be troublesome. After all, he couldn't always be there, and the cost of compensation was less than that of a Tier 6 mechanical weapon's energy consumption. But if there were any stubborn ones with thick heads, he didn't mind showing them the power of money and blasting them to pieces. After the conversation with Ferris, Maximus prepared a sum of compensation according to the rules, but Ferris initially refused to accept it. However, when Maximus emphasized that friendship and business should be kept separate, Ferris reluctantly agreed. Also, if you can try not to offend the Birun city, Ferris warned. Birun city? Maximus knows this city, as it was the only place you can go to travel to other places in the Cursed Continent. Does it have a huge background? Yes, they are one of the EGCC branches in the scattered island in the Cursed Continent, Ferris said lightly as if it was a common knowledge. Maximus was just slightly surprised, as only EGCC was capable of that amount of transportation work. Furthermore, his disguised identity was a VIP-6, so it should be quite easy to talk to them. Leaving the castle, Maximus set off for the other kingdoms within the Sunburnt Plateau. With more than 50 kingdoms in the region, he estimated that at least half of them had magic crystal mines, which meant he would need to provide a minimum of 3 million in compensation. However, considering his vast wealth of over 400 million magic crystals, this amount was not a significant expense. Arriving at his second destination, Maximus headed directly toward the capital city. It was easy to identify as the capital due to its prosperous style and higher mana density. Similar to his previous encounters, Maximus released his spiritual signature, catching the attention of the kingdom's ruler who flew up to meet him. I'm Maximus Shadowcrest, and I have come with the will of my teacher to request that you leave this plateau, Maximus declared, presenting the clone token of his disguised identity as Edward Williams, the Tier 5 mage and alchemist. Sensing the aura of a Tier 5 mage emanating from the token, the ruler of the kingdom became frightened. After all, his patriarch was only a Tier 4 mage, so it was natural for him to feel scared. I will leave willingly, the ruler hurriedly responded. Maximus found it amusing how easy it was to intimidate people by using the tiger skin he disguised as a teacher. Don't worry, you have 1 week to do so, he stated. And if you happen to possess any magic crystal mines, I am willing to compensate you with 100,000 magic crystals, Maximus explained. Oh, the kingdom ruler was stunned by Maximus' straightforward compensation. We don't have any magic crystal mines, he replied, feeling disappointed. Considering that a low-grade magic crystal mine produces approximately 1,000 magic crystals per year, the ruler was surprised by the compensation of 100,000 magic crystals. It was equivalent to almost 100 years' worth of mining. Unfortunately, he was only stationed in this region to recruit talents for his family, and his territory did not possess any magic crystal mines. In that case, I will give you 10,000 magic crystals as compensation, Maximus said. Although he appeared extravagant with his wealth, such an approach would help establish a positive reputation for the Sunburnt Plateau in the future. After all, Maximus couldn't develop the entire land by himself, he needed external stimulation from the outside world. Otherwise, he could simply isolate the Sunburnt Plateau and be done with it. The ruler of the kingdom was ecstatic upon hearing about the compensation. This amount was equivalent to his private property, and he no longer needed to hand it over to his family. After all, this compensation is not from the magic crystal mine that he needed to hand over to the family. After some quick discussion and the presentation of the compensation, Maximus headed toward the next kingdom. A week passed. Maximus continued his visits to the remaining kingdoms without much rest. Only 2 families, the Moldhound and Wessel families, were left to negotiate with. Maximus decided to visit the Moldhound family's territory first since Ferris had mentioned that they were straightforward to talk with. After some time, Maximus finally reached the capital city of the Moldhound kingdom. Upon arriving at the castle in the center, he released his spiritual consciousness, attracting the attention of a tall, muscular man. "Who are you? What do you want?" the man asked. "I'm Maximus Shadowcrest, and I've come on behalf of my teacher's will. He intends to take the entire Sunburnt Plateau as his territory," Maximus explained, presenting the clone token. The man carefully felt the mana emanating from the token and confirmed its authenticity. "Is that so?" "I'm Douglas Moldhound, the one in charge here," Douglas introduced himself. "Why don't we continue our conversation inside the castle?" Douglas invited. "Sure," Maximus agreed. He parked his flying boat and followed Douglas toward the castle. Once inside, they sat down to talk. "I'm sure you're aware of the rules," Douglas stated. "Of course I am," Maximus replied confidently. Ferris had already briefed him on the rules, which involved compensation. For those without the backing of a Tier 5 powerhouse or above, Maximus only needed to compensate them with 100,000 magic crystals per magic crystal mine. However, for those with such backing, the compensation would be 10 times the amount, plus the loss of talent they could recruit based on the population. It's easy to calculate then. Firstly, you have 4 magic crystal mines, which amounts to 4 million in compensation, Douglas stated. As for the population, it's around 26 million, which would require 2.6 million magic crystals, he continued, calculating the total compensation. Maximus quickly agreed with the calculations and took out 6.6 million magic crystals as compensation. Just as Ferris had mentioned, the Moldhound family was straightforward as long as things are properly settled according to the rules. Douglas agreed to leave in a few days without creating any unnecessary trouble. With the negotiations with the Moldhound family successfully concluded, only the Wessel family remained to be dealt with. Chapter 64 owned the whole plateau. In the Wessel territory, Maximus was on the flying boat, gazing at the castle in front of him. As he released his spiritual consciousness, a scholarly young man emerged with an arrogant expression. "What do you want?" asked the scholar, Isaac Wessel. "I'm Maximus Shadowcrest. On behalf of my teacher, I ask you to leave this land." Maximus was not polite and told him why he had come, producing the clone token to prove his teacher's identity. Isaac allowed his spiritual consciousness to scan the token. Upon seeing that it was only a Tier 5 mage, he sneered. "So what?" Although it was rare to have a Tier 5 mage born on this continent, he didn't take it seriously because his father was also a Tier 5 mage. Furthermore, as a big family, they had multiple Tier 5 mages. Plus the connection they had built over the generation, he didn't take Maximus, a student of a Tier 5 mage, seriously. If his teacher came personally, maybe he would gladly bow his head. But just a student, it's looking down on him. Maximus was a little surprised by the other party's arrogance. Although Ferris had warned him that the Wessel family was somewhat arrogant, he didn't expect that they wouldn't even follow the rules. Usually, when a Tier 5 mage or a Tier 6 knight was born on the Cursed Continent, if they didn't have a territory of their own, they could choose any land on the Cursed Continent as long as it didn't infringe on other families' interests. They could just give some compensation to the rulers or factions of the chosen land and be done with it. But the person in front of him seemed to be looking for trouble. "I told you to leave this land," Maximus said, calming himself and repeating with a dark expression. "Hey, sure, just give me 100 million magic crystals," Isaac said with a disdainful smile. This made Maximus angry. 100 million was already a significant amount of money. Moreover, given the other party's attitude, if he gave it, he would likely ask for more. Seeing that Isaac was also a Tier 3 nascent mage, Maximus tried to release his soul pressure. When the soul pressure landed on Isaac, it turned his smiling face upside down. How dare a lowly student attack him? Not reconciled, Isaac also released his soul pressure. However, the result was crushing as Isaac, who had been flying, fell into a kneeling position due to the vast difference in the quality of their souls. During his 2 months of studying knowledge about the mechanic profession, his soul had somewhat become purer. Although he was still not a Tier 1 mechanic, the knowledge he had slightly improved the quality of his soul. Maximus, observing Isaac in his kneeling position, flew in front of him and raised his foot and trampled his head. "Now what?" Maximus sarcastically asked. Although he knew that Isaac's background was not simple, so what? He had been lenient in his approach to conquering the Sunburnt Plateau because he didn't want to deal with the troublesome aftermath. However, it didn't mean he could tolerate this kind of naked extortion.
You?
Isaac nearly vomited blood from humiliation.
And what about me?
Maximus teased, enjoying Isaac's expression. Seeing Isaac's face turning red with anger, Maximus kicked him in the face, sending him flying several meters away. Maximus had controlled his strength, otherwise, his kick alone could have shattered Isaac's face. Although a Tier 3 nascent mage's body is slightly stronger than that of a Tier 3 Earth Knight, let's not forget that Maximus was already a Tier 4 Sky Knight in addition to being a Tier 3 nascent mage. Now what? Still want those 100 million magic crystals? Maximus smirked. Hump, Isaac stood up and cleaned himself, choosing not to reply to Maximus. He knew he was no match for the other party, so he swallowed his anger. Do you still want compensation? Maximus repeated, slowly walking towards him. Isaac's legs were already trembling. He didn't want another humiliation, and although the kick wasn't too strong, it still hurt.
No.
You can do whatever you want, Isaac said as he flew away, without taking his belongings. Anyway, all of his important items were in his storage ring. But as he thought of Maximus, just a lowly servant in his eyes, his heart grew cold. He swore he would tell his father to teach Maximus a lesson. As for his teacher, a Tier 5 mage similar to his father, he didn't consider the matter. After all, how could a newly promoted Tier 5 mage offend his family just for the sake of a so-called student? Of course, he didn't show any reaction or inform Maximus to wait for his revenge. Although he was arrogant, he knew how to recognize the situation. Maximus, seeing Isaac flew out, just smiled. Although he somehow offended the other party, however, it is just one family, he thought he can handle that much. Moreover, it's millions of magic crystals saved. With that, all of the rulers in the Sunburnt Plateau were gone. As for the barren city, he didn't touch that anyway. They were beneficial for the future of his territory. In the castle courtroom. It had been a day since Maximus returned to his kingdom, and without wasting any time, he immediately convened a meeting with his ministers. How is the situation of the people in the Sunburnt Plateau in the week that I was gone? Maximus inquired. It had taken a week to persuade all the rulers in the land. Fortunately, before undertaking that task, Maximus had discussed the follow-up plans with his ministers. Everything is going according to plan, Your Majesty, Doran began. The rulers of the kingdom only took their people and left directly, without causing much chaos. Furthermore, the Etheria Pavilion can provide enough food for the entire city for a month, so the people didn't panic much.
Good.
Maximus expressed his satisfaction that everything had been smooth so far. Your Majesty, how should we settle the people? Landon asked. Just as we planned before, gather them around the surrounding lands of the Moonlight Kingdom, Maximus replied after giving it some thought. The Sunburnt Plateau was too vast to occupy, and reforming the entire land was not just 1 or 2 years. It would be better to gather the people in one place rather than letting them scatter across this expansive land. Your Majesty, such a task is unprecedented and requires a huge amount of manpower, Landon said in shock. He had thought that His Majesty would just allow the people to manage their own land and collect taxes. But moving the entire population to one place indicated that His Majesty had bigger ambitions than he had realized. However, instead of being overwhelmed, Landon became even more motivated by the challenging task. Don't worry too much. I have already thought about this. Before coming back, I have already prepared flying boats, Maximus explained. The Sunburnt Plateau spanned a radius of at least 50,000 kilometers, so one can imagine the weight of the task of transporting the people. As for how the previous Etheria Pavilion transported supplies, they used storage rings paired with individuals with exceptional speed. There were quite a few Tier 3 Earth Knights from the previous Fairy Kingdom. By purchasing specialized Knight cultivation manuals focused on speed, these Earth Knights could reach the same speed as a Tier 4 Sky Knight. As for the possibility of rebellion, Maximus simply beat them until they were willing to sign a soul contract. While a soul contract should be voluntary, it wasn't of much use to him. It merely required more beatings until they willingly surrendered with all their hearts. After discussing the following plans and countermeasures for a while, Maximus concluded the meeting.
That's it.
Just execute everything according to plan, Maximus dismissed the meeting. On the top of the castle, Maximus sat drinking tea while brainstorming ideas for the future structure of his territory. He scanned the system mall in search of the metamorph architecture, the device he had used previously. Metamorph architecture, a device that can create an architectural plan based on your needs. It can gather mana, build defensive barriers, and offer various attack capabilities. It is a limitless architectural plan generator. Full use, price, 8 billion low-grade magic crystals. Tisk, Maximus clicked his tongue at the still expensive price. Fortunately, there was a one-time deal option available where the cost was based on the plan. He clicked on the item and selected the service. Suddenly, a cube-like device appeared in the void. After that, a virtual panel appeared in the air. Metamorph architecture. Scan. Array functions. Templates. Maximus clicked on a scan and entered the range, choosing the entire plateau. Detected 7,863,981,663 kilometers of land. Detected 314,159,265 human beings. Detected 798,535,269,934 other living beings. Afterward, he saw a hologram version of the entire sunburnt plateau, which was shockingly massive. To put it in perspective, Earth is only 500 million square kilometers in terms of land area. The sunburnt plateau, on the other hand, is at least 15 times larger than the surface area of Earth. Unfortunately, much like Earth, which is 70% ocean and uninhabitable by people, sunburnt plateau has over 90% barren or dangerous land unfit for human habitation. Fortunately, with the reconstruction of the land, it would soon become lush with vitality and pure mana. However, Maximus estimated that reforming the entire plateau could take hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Therefore, he could only gradually expand the scope of his territory as the population grew. Chapter 65 Relocation Plan. On the top of the castle, Maximus examined the virtual screen. Please input data. Range. Function. Other requirements. Considering the range, he decided to set it at 10 million square kilometers, which should be sufficient for now. For the function, he inputted a Tier 3 mana gathering array, Tier 3 mana purification array, Tier 3 attack and defense array, and multipurpose connection and monitoring array. The multipurpose connect and monitoring array is like the function of the continental array in the arcane continent to connect tokens together. As for the other requirements, he set the architectural array to be a hybrid of both natural and artificial arrays. While natural arrays were cheaper to set up, they took a significant amount of time. Maximus, however, lacked time and needed a quicker solution. By opting for a hybrid array, he could swiftly establish an artificial array by purchasing a set of array materials, while also incorporating natural array elements that would require land reformation. After carefully inputting the data and considering what was lacking, he clicked on a generate. Calculating. The total cost is 45 billion gold. Do you confirm? This cost amounted to at least 1/10 of his wealth, and it was only for the blueprint. The actual construction materials would require even more funds. But for the sake of building his ideal kingdom and realizing his future plans, Maximus gritted his teeth and clicked confirm. Some may consider it useless or a waste of money, but this was his pursuit. After all, becoming stronger was merely for self-protection. His true ideal was to construct a place that existed in his dreams. Although he knew it would require a vast amount of money that could have been used to further strengthen himself, he refused to give up. Without a goal, what's the difference between him and a salted fish? And the first step towards achieving all of this was leveraging the sunburnt plateau to rule the entire cursed continent. The cube-like device emitted light with various colors for a few seconds. Complete. Thank you for your patronage. Afterward, a jade-like slip was left behind as the cube disappeared into the void. Taking the jade slip in his hand, Maximus allowed his spiritual consciousness to enter it, sensing the intricate and complex architectural structures and arrays within. Satisfied with the result, he made his way back to his room and prepared to farm and spread seeds for future generations. In the morning, 100 enormous flying vessels capable of transporting at least 10,000 people each were parked outside the city. It's truly spectacular, Landon sighed as he beheld the sight of 100 massive ships gathered together. Just last night, he had been concerned about the relocation of the people from the sunburnt plateau. Even though His Majesty had mentioned that he had prepared flying boats, Landon had been somewhat skeptical. The flying boat that His Majesty had used upon returning from the arcane continent was indeed fast, but it was too small to transport a large number of people. However, seeing the immense ships before him bolstered Landon's confidence. "Are you ready?" Doran asked Landon. Landon, who had been appointed in charge of the relocation work, replied with a confident smile, "Of course.
After all, how could a man say no?"
As they were conversing, Maximus approached them after inspecting the ships he had purchased from the system. Flying Mary, Tier 3, a mid-sized vessel capable of transporting 10,000 people.
Price 10 million GP.
Compared to the Aurora Spectre, which cost 2.5 million GP despite being smaller, the Flying Mary was relatively cheap. However, it lacked the convenience and protection of the Aurora Spectre, and its speed was slightly slower. However, for the purpose of transporting people within the land, it was sufficient. After all, these flying ships did not need to traverse the sea. Maximus estimated that it would take approximately a year to transport all the people from the sunburnt plateau using these ships.
"How are the preparations going?"
Maximus inquired of Landon.
"It's going well, Your Majesty.
All the soldiers and civilians who will assist in the relocation work are already preparing to board the ships," Landon explained.
"Good," Maximus nodded in approval.
As for the leftover city and the abandoned magic crystal mine, Maximus didn't consider them significant. The income from all the magic crystal mines was only 50,000 to 100,000 magic crystals, an amount he could earn in just a few days using his Tier 5 alchemist fake identity. To him, such matters were trivial compared to what he truly needed: population. After he set up the artificial and natural array, the mana in his territory would become denser and purer without its corrosive property. With the land filled with mana and vitality, he needed people to take care of it and generate value. And instead of merely planting ordinary mortal plants, Maximus planned to cultivate magical plants. Although he could replace people with mechanical puppet, using people is more cost-effective and have more potential than just using puppets. Moreover, people can expand and grow while mechanical puppets cannot. With the abundance of mana and magical plants, over time, Maximus was confident that talented individuals would emerge in batches, whether as mages or knights. With the increasing strength and value of his territory, his plan of digitalized currency would skyrocket in value. It was important to note that the system only accepted currency with sentimental value, such as gold used by mortals. If gold coins were worth 1 GP when converted into the system and one low-grade crystal was worth 1000 GP when converted because of its higher value as it's used by strong individuals, then there is no reason preventing his plan of digitalized currency to surpass the value of magic crystals. With this digitalized currency, he could make purchases in the system mall using valueless currency that he can generate with just a tap of his fingers and then redistribute what he bought to the people, creating a never-ending cycle of growth. And as his territory's population grew in strength and the quantity and quality of mana kept pace with the growth, his digitalized currency would continue to appreciate in value.
"How about you?"
Maximus asked Doran. "The food and shelter are already prepared, and as more people arrive, we will have enough workers to accelerate the construction according to the blueprint Your Majesty provided," Doran replied confidently. Earlier in the morning, Maximus had given a copy of the Jade Slip to Doran. Since Doran was already an official mage, he could use his spiritual consciousness to access the information within the Jade Slip. Doran's path to mage started when Maximus conquered the former Fiere kingdom. With abundant resources at his disposal, Maximus upgraded the talents of his ministers and confidants to rank 2 uncommon potential. Of course, without their knowledge. After providing them with meditation exercises, their strength quickly advanced. Some of them even contemplated rebellion upon discovering their exceptional talent in the path of magic. However, Maximus had already prepared for such a situation. All his ministers and confidants had signed a soul contract, binding them to serve him for their entire lives. The only way they could break the contract was by surpassing his strength, and even then they needed to pay a considerable price. Given Maximus's ever-increasing potential, the chances of that happening were slim. They could just dream and obediently serve him until they die in this life. Upgrading a rank 0 trash potential talent to rank 1 common potential required 10 to 100 GP, while upgrading to rank 2 uncommon potential required 1000 to 10,000 GP. Maximus had already upgraded the potential of his wives and children to at least rank 2 uncommon. Now, he aimed to raise their potential rank for legendary, similar to his own. Upgrading to rank 3 rare potential required 100,000 to 1 million GP, while to reach rank 4 legendary cost 100 million to 10 billion GP. Maximus needed at least 100 billion GP to upgrade his wives and children's potential to rank 4 legendary. However, upgrading his potential to rank 5 mythic potential was out of the question, as it required 100 billion to 10 trillion GP. Moreover, he only needed to wait a little over a year, and his potential would automatically upgrade to a mythic level. After conversing with Landon and Doran for a while, Maximus prepared to undertake his grand work. He needed to set up the artificial array materials in the designated locations throughout the 10 million square kilometers of land of his territory. Only he could accomplish this task, as setting up the artificial array required a vast amount of mana compared to the natural array, which even ordinary people could handle with the help of a manual. The artificial array was a Tier 3 array, making it suitable for Maximus, also a Tier 3 mage, to establish the array. As for the natural array, it would be gradually built by his people after he traveled to the Arcane continent.